I'm a former Little Friends board member, and my son was a student here.
My relationship to this building began in 2002. I worked for a preservation architecture firm called Carrying Company.
I was first introduced to the organization in 2017 when our oldest started preschool here.
I was one of the attorneys that helped bring the building 1830 Sutter Street back to the community.
We were asked to come in and do the initial historic resource evaluation.
And it wasn't until 2023 that I joined as NLF's executive director.
This building has got a very plain front. You don't really notice that much. It's very subtle. When we came in for our preschool interview, I was just astounded at the details. This is a Japanese building. How did this come to be here?
This is a particularly special and unique building. It is probably the first, if not one of the only buildings that was commissioned by and created for Issei women who came and raised the money and had it built themselves.
The first generation Japanese Americans are referred to as the Issei, first generation. The reason there had to be a Japanese YWCA as opposed to just the general San Francisco body was the discrimination of the time. Only certain activities were open for girls of color. So there was a swimming pool there, but coloreds were not allowed. They needed a place for their girls. When the women decided they wanted their own building, they were prevented because of the California alien land law. They were not allowed to hold the title to the property. So the San Francisco Y was persuaded to take the title to the property in trust for the Japanese women. It was illegal to do, and it was a very courageous thing.
When we talk about landmark buildings, people often think about architecture. And this building, 1830 Sutter, has that. It was commissioned to have one of the premier female architects, Julia Morgan, create it.
So Julia Morgan was obviously one of the very rare women architects. She was able to bring a vast amount of experience around the programmatic needs, both of the YWCA community, but also for the Japanese American group, the Issei group.
Issei women were looking to create a space that represented who they were so that they could also continue to practice their cultural rituals, their languages.
So the girls learned cooking, homemaking skills, and then they taught very Japanese arts like ikebana, flower arranging, or tea ceremony.
But you would have seen elements that were clearly references to Japanese architecture. This experience was you come from a narrow hallway into this big volume.
Details along the wood framing and the ranma over the stage.
And you have a sense of awe, I think, but it's also a space that's very useful. It's a flexible space.
It was what they would have experienced in Japan, and yet at the same time, it was very much Julia Morgan's architectural design, so very Western as well.
She had a very small amount of space to work with, but she was also able to incorporate really fundamental aspects of Japanese architecture at a time and with a group that were trying to merge both the Western patterns and the Japanese patterns into the architecture.
And this building is a reminder for us of those women who founded the building.
And so over the years, the building had different names. It was the Japanese YWCA.
Built in 1932 as that space and place for these women.
And then during the war, the Japanese women basically had to leave most everything they had behind.
They lose their homes, they lose their communities, their churches, and
physical possessions, and of course, their building. And without really knowing what their future was going to be, whether they would be allowed to return, would they be deported to Japan, would there be some other fate for them? They had no idea. Because they had worked for so long with the San Francisco YWCA, they said, "We are entrusting this to you. Please take care of our building."
This building, 1830 Sutter, is vacant. We don't have the community that built it here anymore.
And the San Francisco Y found a tenant in the American Friends Service Committee.
A lot of very pivotal and significant civil rights work is done here. You have African American groups, but even more interestingly, early LGBTQIA civil rights work is done here.
So again, what makes this place special is that there were additional organizations that were able to come in and use this space.
The Japanese first returned. The American Friends were still the tenants in the building. And that continued until the Friends left in 1960, and the San Francisco Y then moved into the building fully.
After the American Friends Service Committee leaves 1830 Sutter Street, a preschool moves in to use the building, Nihonmachi Little Friends.
Nihonmachi then was able to return the first Japanese American community to this building since the Issei women, making that a place where we could start to build roots for these early learners.
And at this time, everyone just kind of accepted it was the YWCA. So in 1996, the Y, needing an infusion of cash, decided to sell a couple of its properties.
The YWCA decides it's going to sell the building, which means they're going to evict the preschool.
The initial reaction from the community was not so much the loss of the building, but the loss of the site for Little Friends.
Suddenly, Japanese American roots and the origins of this building all come back to the community. They're like, wait a minute, this was supposed to be a Japanese American site for the Japanese American community, built by us. We cannot lose this building for the Japanese American community. We cannot have something like this happen again.
When the researcher went in, he found the language that said the San Francisco YWCA will hold this property in trust for the Japanese women and girls. To us, we said, that's it. And the Y said, no, that just means we trust you, you trust us, it's all good. And we said, no, that is not the story. It's our building. And we can either just give it up and walk away, or we fight for it. And being a lawyer, I said, yeah, let's fight.
In 2002, Nihonmachi was able to purchase the space, which for us as an organization just solidifies our legacy within Japantown. When you have your own building, it allows you then to think what's next for us.
I believe that Nihonmachi Little Friends is the best organization in Japantown. It has served its mission so clearly to build and create community, to bring families into Japantown, and by doing that, build the future of the community.
When people think about historic buildings or preservation, they think it's all about the past and they think it's all about buildings. But at SF Heritage, we know preservation is actually about people and the future.
Having my little ones part of Nihonmachi, going to the preschool, part of the after-school program, how I see my kids are thriving, they're confident. For that, I'll always be grateful for this organization. And while this is our unique story, I think for many families, that could be true for their little ones as well. This is the story of many of our alumni and their families, which is reflected in the return of students who are now grown-up alumni, who are now parents, who are building their beautiful families and choosing NLF for their little ones to start their journey. So for us, it's a privilege and a responsibility.
1830 Sutter Street was built for women and girls in Japantown. And now it's still serving Japantown as a preschool. And that's great. That's what it should have done from the beginning. Is it's like a place to serve the community, and that's what it does today, decades later.